Do you believe it's possible to save 75 men in the middle of a war without firing a single bullet? This isn't a legend. It's not a Hollywood script. It's real. May 1945. Okinawa, Japan. The closest place to hell in that war. Explosions, screams, bodies, and in the middle of it all, a soldier, unarmed, runs through the bullets, dragging the wounded one by one with empty hands and a prayer on his lips. Lord, just one more, just one more. That man was Desmond Doss, and this is his story. It all started far from the war, in the green fields and deep woods of Lynchburg, Virginia. Desmond was born on February 7th, 1919, to a poor but deeply religious family. His father, Tom, a World War I veteran and carpenter. His mother, Bertha, a devoted Seventh-day Adventist. From a young age, Desmond was different. While other boys played war, he avoided conflict. He carried a small copy of the Ten Commandments in his pocket and took one very seriously: "Thou shalt not kill." One day, at just 10 years old, his older brother Harold fell during a game, badly injured, blood everywhere. Desmond dropped to his knees, prayed, begged. When Harold opened his eyes, Desmond made a silent vow. Never again would he let someone die without fighting to save them. But that promise would soon be tested in a way neither he nor the world could ever imagine. Behind the Doss family home hung an old painting on the wall, Jesus Christ, nailed to the cross. Below it, a simple inscription: "Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends." Desmond looked at that image every day. To him, it wasn't just art, it was direction. Faith wasn't just part of his life, it was the root of who he was. On Saturdays, the family kept the Sabbath holy. Desmond refused to break that commandment, while other teens chased. Parties, he chased silence, mission, purpose. In his teens, he worked in a shipyard, polishing metal, carrying wood. But once again, violence would shape his destiny. One night, his father came home drunk, angry. He snapped, nearly killed Desmond's mother in a fit of rage. Desmond reached for the gun on the table, pointed it at his own father. Time froze, finger on the trigger, his father's eyes filled with fear. But Desmond didn't shoot. He dropped the gun, collapsed to the floor, and wept. And there, on the cold wooden floor, he made a new vow. Never again would he touch a weapon, not even to defend himself. To most, a man without a gun is weak, but to Desmond, that was the highest form of courage, facing evil without becoming part of it. Years later, that choice would put him on trial, not in court, but in the eyes of his own brothers in uniform, and soon into the most brutal war of the century. December 7th, 1941, the radio crackled in the Doss family living room. The words were sharp, cutting like a blade. "Pearl Harbor has been attacked. Hundreds of American soldiers dead. Battleships sunk. The United States was now at war." Desmond Doss, just 22 years old, felt his heart pounding. He didn't want to kill, didn't want to hold a weapon, but he also couldn't sit back while others were bleeding for his country. So he made a radical decision. "I'll go to war, but not to take lives. I'll go to save them," he told his family. "I won't carry a rifle, I'll carry bandages." He volunteered for the U.S. Army and asked to serve as a medic. He was accepted and sent to basic training. But his greatest battle wasn't against bullets. It was against his own army. From day one, he refused to touch a weapon. He wouldn't fire at the range, wouldn't march with a rifle, wouldn't break the Sabbath. Confusion turned to anger. Superiors called him a coward. Fellow soldiers mocked him, threw boots at him while he slept, cursed him during drills. Still, he didn't strike back. Instead, he cleaned their boots in secret, helped treat their wounds. offered prayers in the dark. One man said, "That bastard's gonna get us killed out there." But Desmond stood firm, took them all to court, fought for his right to serve, unarmed, and he won. The war hadn't even begun, and Desmond was already fighting for his soul. What he didn't know was that his true battlefield was waiting far across the ocean on a blood-soaked island called Okinawa. The army relented, but just barely. Desmond Doss was allowed to continue training. As a conscientious objector, he would be a combat medic. He would go to the front lines without a weapon. No one knew what to do with him. What kind of soldier walks into hell without even a knife? At Fort Jackson, South Carolina, Desmond always stood out. While others drilled with rifles, he walked with a Bible in his chest pocket. While they threw grenades, he studied anatomy and scripture. They called him names: holy man, weakling, Bible nut. But when someone got hurt, they went to Desmond. He bandaged their blisters, cleaned their wounds, listened when no one else would. Bit by bit, the walls of prejudice began to crack. Then came the final order: deployment to the Pacific. Desmond's unit, Company B, 1st Battalion, 307th Infantry, 77th Division, was headed for Okinawa. On the transport ship, soldiers whispered, "Doss won't last a minute out there. He'll be the first to die." But Desmond didn't fear death. He prayed, "Lord, use me, not to take life, but to save it." And when they landed on Okinawa's shores, they marched toward a place darker than any battlefield before it. Towering cliff, carved with tunnels, traps, and the enemy, Hacksaw Ridge. No one expected that the man with no gun would become the greatest hero on that mountain of death. Okinawa, April 1945. The final, bloodiest battle of the Pacific had begun. Over 180,000 Allied troops, over 100,000 entrenched Japanese soldiers, and in the middle, a jagged wall of rock and wire, 120 meters high. The troops called it Hacksaw Ridge because it tore men apart, like meat through a blade. It wasn't just a cliff, it was the gate to the island. Whoever controlled it controlled Okinawa. Desmond's unit climbed the escarpment with ropes, boots slipping against mud and ash, and at the top they stepped straight into hell. Bullets screamed, shells thundered, limbs flew, men died by the dozens. The air stank of blood and fire. The ground shook with every explosion, and Desmond was there. No gun, no knife, just a medical bag, some bandages, a prayer. He ran from man to man under fire, tied off limbs, stopped bleeding, dragged the wounded through smoke and death. His hands were soaked with blood, his knees gave out, but he never stopped. That first day, 55 of his brothers died. Many more were injured. The company was forced to retreat and broken, battered, but Desmond refused to leave. He looked out over the battlefield where bodies moaned in the mud and whispered, "Lord, help me get just one more." And as his brothers climbed down to safety, Desmond Doss turned and walked alone back into the mouth of war. Night fell on Okinawa like a curtain of smoke and screams. The sky glowed red. The earth trembled beneath the weight of death. The battlefield was a graveyard, lit only by fire and fear. The order had been clear: retreat, now. And the men obeyed. One by one, they lowered themselves down the ridge, wounded, shaken, silent. But Desmond Doss stayed. He was alone. No rifle, no backup, only his faith and a prayer. He crawled through craters, dragged himself past corpses and shell holes, listening for the faintest cry for help. And when he heard one, he moved. One wounded man at a time. He patched, lifted, and dragged them to the edge of the escarpment. Then he tied a rope around them and lowered them, with his bare, blistered hands, into the darkness below. Again and again. Hour after hour, without sleep, without fear, without stopping. Each time he whispered, "Just one more, Lord. Just one more." Some men were unconscious, others wept when they saw him. They thought they had been left behind, but Desmond never left anyone behind. Down below, soldiers stared in disbelief as wounded men kept arriving, alive. No one knew how. No one knew who, until someone whispered, "It's Doss, he's still up there." They called it the Maida Escarpment, but for those who climbed it, it was a death sentence. Imagine a cliff taller than a 10-story building. No steps, no cover, just barbed wire, enemy gunfire, and hidden tunnels carved into the stone. Every inch a trap, every step a gamble. The soldiers called it Hacksaw Ridge because it didn't just kill you, it tore you apart. And it was there, on that cursed rock, that Desmond Doss carved his name into history. After that first night, when he saved dozens, he didn't leave. He climbed back up again and again. Each time his unit returned, Desmond went with them. No rifle, just his bag and an unshakable resolve. While others cleared bunkers with grenades, Desmond listened for moans beneath the rubble. He crawled under bodies, dodged sniper fire, felt the heat of explosions at his heels, and when he found the wounded, he smiled. The smile of a man who carried not a weapon, but a mission. He saw friends die, felt hunger, thirst. His legs trembled, but his soul never wavered. Hacksaw Ridge wasn't just a battlefield. It was a test of one man's soul, and where others broke, Desmond rose, not by killing, but by saving, and the bloodier the soil became, the more he whispered, "Just one more, Lord, just one more." At the height of the carnage, he would do the unthinkable, stay behind again, alone, by choice. The ground shook, the air turned to fire. Japanese artillery lit up the ridge. Grenades rained from above. Bullets hissed past every inch of cover. The order came, "Fall back! Immediate evacuation!" Soldiers scrambled, grabbing what wounded they could, climbing down the ropes under a sky torn apart by war. But Desmond Doss didn't move. He looked back. The battlefield was littered with motionless bodies and soft cries, too faint for most to hear. But Desmond heard them, and he made his choice. He would stay, again, alone. He tightened his boots, shouldered his medical bag, and walked straight into the fire. Through mortar craters, past lifeless faces, he crawled. Every wounded man he reached, he treated, lifted, dragged. Then, once more, he tied them to a rope and lowered them down, hand over blistered hand. Down below, soldiers looked up into the blackened sky and saw the wounded descending, one after another. And every time they asked, "Who's still up there?" the answer came in whispers, "It's Doss, he's still going." For over 12 hours he fought through hell, not to kill but to save. And that night, the war met the man it couldn't break. In the silence between explosions, Desmond Doss whispered the same words, "Just one more, Lord, just one more." It wasn't a cry, it wasn't desperation, it was a mission. His hands were torn, his muscles screaming, every step a battle with a pain. But still he crawled, still he reached, still he saved. He carried men with no legs, men blinded by shrapnel, men sobbing, trembling, praying for death. Some he dragged with ropes, others on his shoulders. Under nearly 100 meters through sniper fire. Once, he shielded a man with his own body as mortar fragments exploded around them, and each time he returned to the battlefield, he prayed, "Just one more." The same soldiers who had mocked him but now wept for him, now prayed for him. Down below, they watched as injured men kept arriving, still breathing. Desmond Doss, the man with no weapon, was doing the impossible. That night alone, he saved 75 lives, 75, without a single bullet fired, only courage, only compassion, only faith. It was as if a divine hand guided him, or maybe it was his own, the hand of a simple man with unshakable conviction. Desmond Doss didn't see uniforms, he saw wounds. On that battlefield, amid the smoke and the death, he didn't ask if a man was friend or enemy. If they were breathing, he tried to save them. One of the most powerful moments came when he found a wounded Japanese soldier lying among the rubble, abandoned, bleeding. Most would have walked past. Some would have finished the job, but Desmond knelt beside him, cleaned his wound, gave him morphine, and moved on. Without a word, another. Time, a fellow American soldier, one who had mocked him for months, was hit by shrapnel. He lay screaming, bleeding, helpless, and through the haze of smoke he saw a figure crawling toward him. It was Desmond. No judgment, no hesitation, only mercy. Every man saved was a quiet rebellion against the hatred that filled that war. Every life in his arms was a blow to the idea that compassion dies in combat. While others lost their humanity, Desmond carried his through mud, through fire, through hell. In a world gone mad, he proved there was still room for kindness. Even on the edge of death, but the war wasn't done with him yet. His final trial was still to come. Desmond's body was reaching its limit, but his spirit still stood tall. It happened during another brutal assault on Okinawa. The air shook with gunfire. Shouts of pain echoed through smoke and dirt. Desmond sprinted toward a fallen soldier. No hesitation when a grenade landed nearby. He didn't flinch. He threw himself on it. The explosion tore into his legs, his back, his side. Blood poured from his wounds, but he didn't cry out. He was still alive. Crawling, shaking, he dragged himself to shelter. But then he saw another soldier, worse off, without a word. He gave up his own stretcher, laid back down in the mud so the other man could be carried out, and as he waited, a sniper's bullet ripped through his arm, shattering bone, bleeding, broken. He fashioned a splint using a rifle, the same kind of weapon he'd refused to carry. Desmond Doss, the man who never held a gun, now used one just to hold his shattered arm together. He was finally evacuated, barely alive, but alive, and with him 75 men who otherwise wouldn't be. He had given everything, his blood, his strength, his body, and he asked for nothing, but the world would never forget what he gave. When Desmond Doss returned home, there were no parades, no crowds, no headlines. He stepped off the transport quietly, wounded, scarred, and at peace. He reunited with his beloved Dorothy, his wife, his anchor, and began a slow, painful recovery. Shrapnel remained in his body. His lungs were damaged. Doctors told him he might never walk properly again. But Desmond never complained. To him, every scar was a life saved. Every ache, a reminder of his purpose. For years, he didn't speak about what he had done. He didn't seek attention, didn't boast. When asked, he would simply say, "I just didn't want my boys dying up there." He didn't wear his uniform around town, didn't count the number of men he'd rescued. He carried it all quietly until the army called him to Washington, D.C. And there, in front of the president, top military leaders, and a country that finally understood, Desmond Doss stood as a symbol of something rare, a man who had faced war without ever firing a shot, and won. But even in that moment, he felt unworthy. He had saved 75 lives, and still wondered if he could have saved more. October 12th, 1945, Washington, D.C. A quiet man stood before the President of the United States, thin, humble, wearing his dress uniform like it didn't belong to him. President Harry S. Truman looked him in the eyes and said, "You're the bravest man I've ever met. You really deserve this, and I consider it an honor to pin this on you." He placed the Medal of Honor, the nation's highest military award, on Desmond Doss's chest. In the official citation it read, "For gallantry and intrepidity above and beyond the call of duty, as a medical aid man who saved 75 men under constant enemy fire without carrying a weapon, Desmond Doss, the conscientious objector, the man they tried to expel, the man they called coward, had now become a legend. But Desmond didn't raise his arms, didn't smile for the cameras. He simply bowed his head and whispered, "Thank you." For him, that medal wasn't about glory. It wasn't about war. It was about love, duty, doing what was right, when it mattered most. That day, the world learned a truth Desmond had always lived by: you don't have to kill to be a hero. After the war, Desmond Doss returned to the one thing he truly longed for: a quiet life. He worked as a farmer, lived simply, raised a son with his beloved Dorothy. He never sought fame, never chased a spotlight, but the men he had saved never forgot. They visited him, wrote to him, cried in his arms. Teachers told his story in classrooms. Pastors spoke his name in sermons. Young soldiers whispered it before battle. Still, Desmond stayed humble, stayed quiet. Then, in 2004, a small documentary titled The Conscientious Objector brought his story to the surface. The world finally saw him speak, his voice slow from injury, but his eyes still full of compassion. And in 2016, his life became a major film, Hacksaw Ridge, directed by Mel Gibson. Millions wept in theaters. Millions stood to honor a man they'd never known, but would never forget. But Desmond didn't see the full wave of recognition. He passed away on March 23, 2006, at 87 years old in his sleep. Peaceful, at rest, after a life of war, lived without violence. Today, his name echoes not as a warrior, but as a guardian, not for what he destroyed, but for what he saved. Desmond Doss wasn't the strongest. He wasn't the fastest. He wasn't the most feared. But he may have been the bravest soldier of World War II. On a battlefield where life meant less than a bullet, he offered everything he had, except hate. He went to war without a weapon, without the intent to harm, and still, he won. He defeated fear. He endured rejection. He overcame hell. He saved 75 lives, risked his own again and again, and asked for nothing in return. His story forces us to ask, what would I have done? Would I have had the courage to kill, or the far rarer courage to love? Today, Desmond rests at the Chattanooga National Cemetery in Tennessee. His grave is simple, but his legacy immeasurable. He proved that war can destroy cities, armies and men, but it can't destroy the conscience of someone who chooses compassion over violence. This story isn't just about war, it's about hope, about what one ordinary man can do when he refuses to be ordinary. If this story moved you, don't let it be forgotten. Like, share, comment, subscribe. Desmond Doss saved 75 lives. Let's save his story from being lost to history.